Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Keith Sarasin. My man, Keith, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am feeling absolutely unstoppable. Are you feeling unstoppable?
I'm feeling
today?
unstoppable today, man. I'm back on site, traveling. It feels good. Respecting the social distancing. We're still doing some things. These are brand new mic covers every time we get started. So
absolutely,
we are feeling unstoppable. That's for sure, man. So at the age of 15, Keith Sarasin started working at a local sub shop, washing dishes and making subs. By 2012, he held titles from Sous Chef to Executive Chef and eventually Private Chef before founding the Farmer's Dinner in 2012. I already mentioned 2012. It was 2012, just in case you guys weren't sure. It was 2012. The Farmer's Dinner concept came about Keith's time working with local farmers in the New England area. He wanted a way to support local farms while sharing the stories he learned from his time with various farmers. Since 2012, the Farmer's Dinner has hosted over 81 farm-to-table events across New England and has fed more than 20,000 customers, raising over $140,000 for local farms. Man, thank you so much for that work. And on top of this, you are responsible for 3 books. You have the Perfect Turkey, the Farmer's Dinner, A Story in Every Bite, and you also have a new book about to launch. Do you want to drop that one on us real quick?
Yeah, it's just kind of an expose into meat. We're going to talk a lot about butchering. We're going to give you an insane amount of 300 recipes.
That's
awesome. I'm like 3 weeks from the deadline, and I'm like, what am I doing? Right?
Is there a list I can get on to make sure I know when that one's available?
For you, I'm just going to send you a copy.
Oh man, that'd be great. Thank you so much. So before we get into your story and find out how you got to where you are today, let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
You got it. So I say it all the time. Maya Angelou, amazing human being. She said, "You did what you knew how to do, and when you knew better, you did better."
I get a lot of Maya Angelou quotes, but that's the first one. Why does that resonate with you?
Because I think like everyone, we always mess up. We always, we do our absolute best in that moment. And then when we fail, we either take that path of, oh, I screwed up and now life is over, or we go, hey, I'm going to learn from this and I'm going to get better. And so it hits every core, Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of something I like to say often is you don't know until you know.
Right.
You just got to go sometimes. And the best way to figure it out is just to take the chance, just
absolutely, man.
Open minds. So where does it make sense to start sharing your story? It says in your bio, 15 is when you started working in the restaurant industry. But did it start before then?
Yeah. Well, so growing up, it was just my mom and I. We lived in the second largest city in New Hampshire called Nashua. Yeah. I never wanted to be a chef. That isn't like, I think these people have these great epiphanies where they're like, I was, knee high to a grasshopper and I knew I wanted to do this. And like, I didn't. I went to school for marriage and family therapy. I got a psych degree. And I still say I don't use it, but I think we all know in this industry we probably use it a little bit.
There is absolutely a trend of people that I've come across that were in school for psychology who end up into the restaurant industry some way, somehow. I don't know if it's because it's a popular just degree to get, and there's not a lot of psychologists, but there's a ton of majors, but our industry has a ton of psychologist majors. I wonder why. What are your thoughts on that?
So first day in my degree, we're all sitting there in class, scared as hell, and my professor, he comes up and he says, "You're all here because you're somewhat broken and you want to know why." And I thought about that a lot. I'm like, man, that's kind of it. I grew up with an absentee father, just my mom and I wanted to go into marriage and family. You don't need to be Freud to figure out the lineage there.
Yeah.
So I think for me, we all want to understand ourselves at a deeper level. And, psychology was that for me. And I thought that was going to be my career path. And so obviously life takes a lot of different turns. So I'm 15 years old and I wanted a mountain bike so bad because all my friends had these really cool mountain bikes. And my mom's like, yeah, well, we can't afford it. So there's a sub shop at the end of the road. Why don't you go apply? And I did. And I started washing dishes. And, there's no glory in that, especially when you're 15. But at the same point, it's kind of cool because now you got a job. And I worked hard. As hard as a 15-year-old will work, and ended up saving up to buy a bike. And I think that moment was pretty indelible for me because I was like, wow, if you put in the work and you shut your mouth, good things can happen. And I think that a lot of my career was kind of, paved off of that, right? Where it's like, sometimes you just need to learn to shut up. I think that lesson took me a little bit while longer than at 15. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of my first swing into the restaurant industry.
Yeah, I love it. And I know we actually, so this is actually your second time on the show. I meant to mention in the intro that you joined us, Keith joins us when we're doing the Corona Chronicles. You're one of my guests. You started, we'll probably scale into what's going on with more modern day or current day situations, but you started Industry, Industry United was the name of the Facebook group. If Keith's name sounds familiar, it's because he was the gentleman I had on the show a few months back to talk about COVID-19. But what was the reason why I wanted to bring that to the surface? I had a reason for that. I can't remember what it is. I'm sure it'll come back to me. I'm just curious, how has psychology served you in life, in the restaurant industry? Because there's just so many lessons that we can pull. How are you better because of it?
Sure. I think people get the misconception that psychology is this magic trick. So, we're sitting here talking and I'm like, well, I'm analyzing you, it's not the way it works. I certainly don't, utilize that. It's not a magic trick. So I think what happened is my time in college helped me understand how to research things better. And to me, that actually made the biggest difference, right?
Okay. So how did you start research? Like, what's the proper way to go about researching something?
Sure. So for me, I'm always a pretty passionate person. My mom was like, she had an amazing heart. So with me, I would follow kind of my bliss there. And so when I get obsessed with something, it literally like turns into that obsession. Indian food is a good example of it. When I fell into that, I was like, not only am I going to learn this cuisine, but I'm going to learn every single solitary state. I'm going to learn Hindi. I'm going to learn everything I possibly can, because to know one thing, you have to know so here's the psychology. Ready? So if you wanted to change a belief system, you have to weaken what's called the supporting beliefs around it. So think of it like a spider web. And right in the middle is that core belief. That core belief could be anything that you can insert in there. Well, there's a system of supporting beliefs around that. And to just change somebody's belief is almost impossible. You have to weaken the supporting beliefs behind, around it. And so I think that's what I did when it came to research. I was like, if I'm going to believe something, I need to make sure that the supporting beliefs actually make sense to the core belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, but listening to you say that, like, one of the things that I've noticed is, like, before starting this podcast, I was like, I want to know why people are successful in the industry, and I want to figure out the reason why, right? Like, there's one reason why. There is not, but for the record. But when I just, like, getting into that, the more I learn, the more I realize that there's so much. Like, there is no one answer. It's like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And it's just this endless, like, just bottomless pit of, like, information to, like, the more I dig, the more I realize there's more down there.
For sure.
Right? Is that tied into any way what you're sharing? Is it connected?
Yeah, I think so. To kind of bring it in full circle, I think we're all on our own journey, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a weird kind of way to answer that question. We all have our journey, and our journey isn't linear. It's lefts, rights, ditches, valleys, all of these things, and once you understand that, the process to self-discovery isn't saying my goal is X, and once I hit X, I'm happy. Happiness isn't in that part, and I think that's what it takes. The restaurant industry tells us this all the time, right? Like, we start off and we say, cool, I'm cooking, I love this, I want to be this amazing chef who wins James Beard or gets Michelin stars, opens a restaurant, but our journey isn't that linear. It's filled with all this stuff. So I guess my journey, it's been, I never thought I'd be sitting here talking to you. I didn't want to be some famous chef. I wanted to write a book, but I don't think it was a cookbook,
I really hope this isn't the highlight of your career.
But in all honesty, I've been able to meet amazing people through this journey, and it's mostly because I think I give a shit about people more than I give a shit about myself sometimes. That's not always the healthiest thing. That's not but when you actually care for somebody and you care what you're putting on your plate, you care what, this person is, you care about that person, right? It doesn't mean that they have to rule you, but you care about the intrinsic properties of what makes that person and understand that their journey's different too. I know I went off in the left field. I do that.
No, it's cool. I mean, I'm loving the conversation, but I think originally we were talking about this ability to research, and then you realize that there's always this core belief, and then you have to understand what the core belief is, and then understand that around that, you got to figure out all the supporting beliefs. So connect those thoughts.
Sure.
Help me.
This is why you're good at what you do.
Thank you.
So the way that you connect it is this. So if I say, I want to be a successful chef, and my core belief is that success is a definition that I derive from having $1 million in my bank account. Well, if that's my version of success, there's a lot of ways I could get there. So the supporting beliefs around that could be financial stability. It could be, press. It could be whatever. So for me, a lot of people will email, be like, Chef, how did you become successful? And I always respond with, I don't know. I'll let you know when I do.
Yeah.
Because my version of success isn't tied to money.
Relative.
Right. It's tied to something that I believe, that core belief, and the supporting beliefs that subsequently shaped that whole belief system.
And that's weird because people congratulate me for my success all the time, and I'm like, I'm nowhere near where I want to be. Is it like, I mean, for me, that's what I think. I'm like, I have this vision of what I would like to do and what I could do and the good impact I could have. Like, I literally, in my mission statement, it says I want to transform the world.
Yeah.
And I feel like I haven't even put a dent in that. Do you think like having like so back to what we're talking about the journey and like it's being present within the moment to realize that you have achieved something, and that it might not be your ultimate achievable, but all the satellite achievals you're making along the way to get there is success, and you need to recognize that.
For sure.
Is that the same point or a different point that you're trying to make?
No, it's the same point. So let's break it down into kind of an analogy here. If I look at you, so I don't do podcasts. Like I don't know how to set all this stuff up. This is so cool to me, right? So if I look at you and I say, man, like you're super successful. Like you've had all these people on your show. You've been able to do all it right now. There's a tape playing in your head where you're going, well, like, yeah, but I haven't done this and I haven't done this. And it's this internal supporting laundry list of things that you haven't checked off that means success to you. So what means success to me in a podcasting world wouldn't mean success to you. And does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's why like success is just a super subjective term.
Yeah.
You've had people on your show who I could go, wow, man, they're really successful in their field. But they may go, success to me means making it through the next day or raising my child with these virtues and values.
Yeah. And I'm so happy we're starting the podcast like this because one of the things I've identified is that, if we're going to transform the industry and transform the world, it's about injecting new values into the industry. And I think part of a lot of our issues are in society, especially American society, we put so much value on how much money I have. Yeah. Like the reason why people are congratulating you, like how well you're doing or whatever. But at the end of the day, like we know that money is one of those things that no matter how much you have, it's like a drug. You'll just, you'll plateau at that point until you just need the next level, and you'll never be happy. You'll never be successful because you'll always want more. Right. So you've got to inject other values. Like, do I like the thing I'm doing every day? Do I know my work is impacting other people positively? Am I making a difference in my community? Am I changing someone's life? Like, these are the things we need to focus on.
Perfectly said. That's exactly it.
I love it.
But here's the next level of that, right? And the next level is a lot of times we don't talk about what quantifies success for us or what means success because that's vulnerability. And vulnerability isn't something that we do really well in this industry, is it?
In general, I think people in general are afraid to be vulnerable.
Right.
Because I don't know why. I haven't gotten into, I love psychology about it. So if you know the answer as to why we're afraid to be vulnerable, I know the power in being vulnerable. Sure. Same reason, like if a dog rolls over to let you pat its back, like that sucker's pulling you in. Like you're going to bend over and pat that dog.
Yeah.
It pulls you in. When you are vulnerable, it's the same effect. You pull people in.
Right.
So why are we so apprehensive to be vulnerable?
So in the West, we correlate vulnerability with weakness. And so we say, if I'm being vulnerable to one of my peers, then I'm showing a sign of weakness and they can get me. And so it's get them before they get me mentality. And that's not the way that most people work, right?
How do we evolve? See, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's all these like little things. Did I cut you short? Was that just leading to another thought? Because I don't want to.
I would keep going. Okay. I like your thoughts. Go for it, bro.
So like, it's this idea that there's so many things that we inherit and that we just develop over years, millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, we develop these characteristics, and they don't serve us anymore. Like anxiety is one, we're always afraid that around the corner something's going to get us, but we're apex predator now, but we still have that anxiety. And vulnerability is one of those things where we're afraid to be vulnerable. Like, what do we do to communicate to our teams to let people know that like all these things that you feel, anxiety, vulnerability, anger, like all these emotions, these are all emotions that do not serve you anymore. Like, how do you communicate that to people?
Yeah. So great question. So the first way that we do it is by being an example of it, right? My life has not been great all the time. I lost my best friend to cancer. I lost my mom a year and a half ago to cancer. Like,
so
I've had businesses and failed at businesses. Like, these things don't define who I am. I have a choice to either let that be. I can either be the victim to that and that insane emotion that goes along with it, or I can choose to be the victor. And that's a decision that we have to make. So when it comes to vulnerability, it starts by being able to have those conversations, and saying, I'm not as cool as it looks like when you Google me. You know what I mean? Like, I still have those emotions. I still have all that stuff that creeps up.
Yeah, but I think it's important to recognize that these are just emotions, that we're not defined by them, and that we have this amazing thing right in the center of our forehead called the frontal lobe, maybe a little higher, that lets us flip a switch and choose. And that's a very powerful ability once you realize that you choose, that you have the ability to choose your how you feel. It's a game changer for sure. I'm loving this conversation, man. We're totally like in this little rabbit hole, but it was totally worth getting into it. I want to come back to the surface. Sure. When I first spoke to you, I think this is why I mentioned earlier that you were on the show, because you mentioned Steve. And that's where I was going. You mentioned Steve, and I remember thinking to myself, I want to learn more about the Steve dude, but we were talking about COVID, not your life story. So when did Steve come into your life?
Yeah, so Steve and I met, I think it was probably 8. I grew up in the Boys and Girls Club in Nashua. My mom, like I said, she was a single mom, so she would work, and Steve was in a grade higher than me. He was like a year older than me, and he, like, I think we all have those friends that just seem larger than life growing up. Like, he was like the toughest dude, and he would just live life like times 12, and I was just like, man, like, I can't do this. Like, he has no fear. And growing up, we would nerd out. I found out that as much of a jock as Steve was, he was also this like closet nerd who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, yeah, man, let's do this thing. And so I think a lot of the mischief I got into, was because of him, but a lot of amazing memories. And as you spend that much time with somebody, you bond. His family became like family to me. I was living there for the most part. I lived probably a mile down the road. So every single solitary weekend it was sleepovers, and he was the first person who got a car in our group, and so then it was 140 miles an hour to the beach, hoping that I just saw tomorrow. It was nuts. And so
that drive down 101,
oh my god, nuts. And so with Steve, he wanted to be a chef. He was always really good at cooking, and I needed a job, so he would come in and be like, oh, well, I'm working at Red Lobster, like, come on in. And I was like, yeah, like, let's do this thing. And he'd haze the hell out of me, like, just the worst. And I'd follow him from job to job. He ended up becoming a kitchen manager, and then subsequently fired me for mouthing off to him. And in those moments, you're like, screw this kid, like, this kid's a jerk. But over time, you see the content of that person come through, and his heart was unparalleled. So for me, I learned so much about, being able to communicate correctly, vulnerability. We talked about that. We had that relationship where as Steve grew into who he was, he would say, hey man, I'm having like a really bad day. Like, my girlfriend and I broke up. Like, can we talk about it? And like, that level of vulnerability was important and really shaped who I became later on in life.
I love that, man. Yeah, I mean, I think we unpackaged the power of vulnerability pretty well, so I don't know if we need to go back down that. Although, Jared, make a note, because I would love to do a deep dive conversation around the power of vulnerability. And if you know anybody who is an expert on that subject,
for sure,
put them on my radar. We can get them on the show, because I think it's super powerful. What about business? I mean, he taught you about the significance of vulnerability in business, but what else did he teach you about business?
Yeah, so Steve was kind of always the line cook. Then subsequently, the sous chef and ended up running a kitchen. So from a business perspective, he was still figuring out. He was a dreamer.
Yeah.
And him and I gravitated toward that. I was too. I think business for me ended up being a lot of people that came on later on in my life that I started to learn a lot from and idolize. There's a lot of people in the Boston scene. Chris Himmel, who is
past guest in the show.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
You had Himmel on?
Yeah, I gotta get him back on. Listening to your original episode.
Yeah.
To get ready for this conversation, you mentioned his name. I was like, we gotta get Chris back on the show.
Chris is just one of the most genuinely amazing human beings.
Yeah.
And even if he doesn't hear that, I'd say that to anyone. He kind of, when I was starting off in Farmer's Dinner, he allowed us to come to the restaurant to do his farm to post dinners at Post 390. And that was big time for me. I grew up really poor. So going to the first time I walked into one of those dinners, I knew I had to have a suit and it was scary. That stuff's intimidating, right?
Absolutely.
And over the years, Himmel and I became friends. We both use Carl Hills, who's a chief farmer over at Kimball Fruit Farm in Pepperell, Mass. And Carl would, he'd be like, "You remind me of a young Chris Himmel." And I was like, "Who's Chris Himmel?" So years later, I realized what a compliment it was, And, Chris and I became really good friends. So, that helped me, and he's really helped shape me. There's been other people in my life who...
I'm pulling back a layer on Chris Himmel, man.
Yeah.
Really dive into, you're speaking all these great things about him, but what did he teach you about business? How do you try to emulate that compliment? How do you try to bring that compliment to the surface when you think of Chris Hill and the things that he does and how he runs his businesses? How do you try to replicate that in your businesses?
Yeah, so Himmel does. There's a lot of behind the scenes things that he doesn't put out there enough. That I understand why. Being where he is in a career. One of the things that I think is so cool is he takes his staff out on these crazy cool outings that he calls Himmel Hits the Road. And so some of it he's publicized a bit, but he just pays for all of this stuff. And he rented this huge tour bus and took them to the Midwest, all the crew at Harvest one year. He really introduced us to the crew at Harvest, who Chef Tyler Kinnett. We ended up becoming really good friends. Danley, who's one of the sous chefs, Brandon, the whole crew, and we all bonded, and we bonded over our love for ingredients, food, and farms. And so Chris's lesson wasn't the typical student teacher lesson. It was, I would look at him and I'd say, "Man, that's smart." And so I think to be really, to be successful in this industry as an entrepreneur, you have to really look at what people are doing and not openly ask for things, but more so just say, "Hey, this is Himmel Hits the Road is cool." That means a lot to his staff who works so hard for that restaurant.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That was a good example.
So, I think this is the benefits of actually doing that and taking your people on field trips, right? And letting them, the power of just giving your people perspective, right? And letting them not just see how other people are doing things, but then networking with other passionate people within the industry.
Yeah.
What he's doing for his team, he's giving them that perspective, but he's also helping them grow their network.
Yep.
And that in itself is so important in this industry. It's about who you know. It's and this industry is small. Your reputation follows you. So if you can get out there and meet other people and connect with other people with the same passion, that shit compounds. It's you just build momentum. He's doing so much for you in that moment, right?
Yeah.
What else did you get out of these field trips? What was the value there?
So 2018, Chris, so he brought up the crew from Harvest, and there's a really cool story here. So we're all at Kimball Fruit Farm, and Tyler and I are we're at the point where Harvest and the Farmer's Dinner is coming together to throw this beautiful dinner on Kimball Fruit Farm. Since we had that connection of Carl Hills, and so I didn't work with Tyler before. I was judging him in a competition that he killed it. He's an incredible chef. And so this was my first time bonding with Tyler. So we were walking the fields together and he's like, "So what do you want to cook, chef?" And I was like, "I want to take a walk." And so we just talked about our philosophy on food. And so I would show him some foraging stuff, that I was super excited with. And he'd teach me some of the things that he did. It was this perfectly cohesive moment. And so we were up at the upper greenhouse and I was like, "Man, I have an idea. Why don't we just title each of these courses after this walk that we've taken?" So we had the upper greenhouse, the lower field. We had all this cool stuff. And it was really this beautiful symphony of Tyler's creativity and passion, pouring through in these dishes. And, Joshua, who's their pastry chef over there, just coming in and the work that these guys did and the beauty of simple ingredients, it made me go, man, like Himmel knows how to hire people. And that was a really good lesson. And then since then, they've treated me like family and vice versa. I have so much love and respect for them.
But you also attract on to think about the things that he's doing, right? Like people say all the time in the show, and I don't want to undermine the difficulty of finding good people right now. That's a real struggle. Yeah. Maybe not so much. It's getting easier from people I've spoken to that because everyone's getting laid off. Like there's actually people looking for work again in the industry, which is kind of nice. But it's a real challenge. But at the same time, like, what are you doing to attract onto yourself people? Are you this connector who's taking your team on field trips and broadening their horizon? Like, what are you doing to add value aside from a paycheck to your people's lives? And I mean, I know a lot of people are doing a lot, but there's also probably a lot of people listening to this right now saying to themselves, I could probably be doing more,
I love what you just said because you're diving into the deep end. And like, this is the stuff that this industry needs to talk about. Yeah. So what you just said, nailed it, bro. Here's my thought on it real quick. You touched on something that I think in this industry we're scared to talk about, and that's acquisition and subsequently holding on to talent, right? So there's a lot of people, everyone thinks they're a chef nowadays because they watch a Netflix special and they're like, nailed it. To do the work that chefs do is mentally and physically grueling. So what are we doing as owners to attract these people and then help them grow? When I started, my first restaurant was last year. And so I was, scared out of my mind, first of all. There's the vulnerability side of it, right? Like, I did Farmer's Dinner for 7 years at that time, 8 now. But Farmer's Dinner isn't a restaurant. We're a pop-up. So I knew from the beginning that I wanted to make sure that we took our staff to farms so that they could connect. I wanted to make sure that I could be a good boss. And did I nail that? No. There was times where I could have done a lot more.
Yeah.
And I didn't hold myself to the standard of where Himmel is. He's been doing this a while. But at the same point, I looked at people like Chris and I said, there's where I want to be. I certainly made mistakes in the process, but I cared every step of the way. And I think that's where we have to start talking about, taking and allocating money for benefits for these people. We need to talk about, giving them a lifestyle that supports them and really encourages their growth. Because my view of being an owner is my job is whoever the chef is that I hire, my job is to make them the best chef possible, to give them every resource possible, to bring them around the most talented people and nurture and encourage their growth and be a guardrail, but not a bumper car, right? Like a bumper car, you can weave out and it goes a little crazy, but you have the rails. With that, I want them to drive down the road, but I don't want them to wreck everything along the way.
Yeah, man, I'm loving what you're dropping on us. And like one line that is just like echoing something I like to say a lot is like the secret to keeping people in your restaurant is trying to push them out of your restaurant with the tools, the knowledge, the resources, everything, the network, introducing them to other people. Yeah. Do everything you can to get that person to have everything they need to leave you, and they'll stay by you forever, right? Yeah. And then you invest in them. Like, okay, I can't get rid of you, so like, what's your vision? Okay, let's do it, And then you've recreated yourself in this individual. You've literally duplicated yourself. Maybe you've even found a better version, which is even a better scenario.
That's the key. Like, my job is to make sure that not only do I give all of my knowledge to somebody who's taking the reins in the restaurant, but I need them to be better than I was. Because the reality is, I say it all the time, I'm good at cooking. I'm never going to be a Michelin star winning chef, but guess what? I don't want to be. Mm-hmm. Like, what I want to do is I want somebody to take a bite of my food and go, oh man, like that reminds me of this time. I want it to hit a soul vibe to them. In Hindi, they call it the Atma. Like the Atma means the soul, right? So like, I want somebody to hit it in their soul. If you think about your last meal, right? Let's flip the script.
My last meal was literally sitting at this table. And I'm thinking to myself, like I said to you, like I was thinking about the place in Thailand, the Indian food place, that like it literally did that for me. It brought me to a different place. It wasn't India, but it was closer to India than I am now. Sorry.
Yeah,
what were you going to say?
That's perfectly said. Like, so that effect, when it triggers a memory, is called so Dr. Prevost did it. It's called the Madeline effect. And so there was this great psychologist. He was dipping a biscuit in tea one day, and he ate it, and it brought him back to a memory in his childhood. And that's what I try to recreate, right? We want to create the memories where, yeah, it's awesome to look at people who do dehydrated puffed oyster crisps. That shit's really cool, man. If it was my last meal, what do I want to eat? I want to eat the stuff that brings me some sort of level of comfort and triggers this emotional response to me. And to me, that's the food that I always try to put out at farmer's dinner. That's the food that I want to put out in any restaurant that I'm going to open. Like, I want somebody to connect on an atma level, that soul level, right?
I love it, man. I'm loving everything you're dropping on us. Any other people or experiences that are worth bringing to the surface before we start talking about how you actually started your own business?
Sure. It's probably going to be a good segue. I was on another podcast. Can you say that?
There needs to be more restaurant business podcasts. I don't know if it was a restaurant business podcast.
So I was on another podcast recently, and
how dare you?
I know, right? I'm sorry, I'm cheating. So I brought up my old business partner, Chris Vio. And Chris is young still. He's 29. I got a decade on him. But this dude can work circles around any human being ever. And he taught me a lot of Chris and I worked really well together because I think my strengths were some of his weaknesses.
Was this before Farmer's Dinner?
So I hired him for Farmer's Dinner.
Okay.
he was working on another project.
Did you know him before Farmer's Dinner?
So I judged a food competition.
Okay.
So here's the quick 20-second soundbite for it. So I was judging a food competition for a TV show, and he was one of the contestants. And I walked in, and everything he had was laid out perfectly. Like, his knives were perfectly sharp and washed, and like his chef coat was pressed. And I looked at the other judge. I was like, oh, he's gonna win. And she's like, you just know him. And I didn't at the time. He won because his food was just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And we ended up talking after, and like we bonded over food and concepts and farms. And that was a huge part of the turning point in my life. And then that business that he was working with, or that restaurant group, he decided he wanted to go a different way. I brought him on a farmer's dinner, and it was like, it's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes. When you work with somebody who you just get, you're like, whoa, I was thirsty, but like I learned all this stuff. And Chris was definitely one of those people for me.
So 2012, was the word pop-up like even echoing that much at this point within the restaurant industry? Like, where was pop-ups then? Like, why pop-ups? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so I was doing some marketing work for a small agency out of Nashua, and like part of my job was to create kind of like community interest projects.
So how long had you been out of the industry at this point?
Not long. I kind of always like circled the industry a bit. That was a part-time job, so I was still like, cooking a little bit here and there. I hit a point where I didn't really want to do it. When I was an executive, we were sourcing product from 3,500 miles away, and it would be apples. And I'm like, dude, we live in New Hampshire. Like, if we can't go work with a farm, what are we doing? So I took this part-time marketing job, and food was an important part for me. So I was like, hey, why don't we have this pop-up dinner where I'll go hang out with some farmers, get their interest, and then we'll have the farmers talk. And so my boss at the time was like, yeah, run with it. So little did I know, I ended up spending a lot of time with farmers at that point. I showed up day one at Kimball Fruit Farm, and I was like, hey, can I talk to a farmer? And they just laughed at me. They were like, all right, what do you need? And I was like, well, I'm thinking of hosting this like pop-up dinner in Nashua, and I just want, the concept's simple. I just want to like source some food, and then in between the courses, I want a couple farmers to get up and talk about what it's like to farm nowadays. And so Carl Hills came out, and he's like, wait, you want to do what? So I had no money for this. Like, I was just broke at the time, and he's like, yeah, like, all right, I see where you're going with it. If it wasn't for Carl, I probably wouldn't be here.
Okay. Well, what was his impact?
His impact was massive. He came to the dinner. Carl is just a really well-spoken, down-to-earth human being. Donated some product. The chef who ended up doing the dinner was a guy named Joe Drift. He owned an awesome little spot in Nashua at the time, Saffron Bistro. And we sold the thing out really quick, just through the channels of the company that I was working for. At the end of it, all the people started coming up. They were like, what a great event. And I sat there and I was like, I didn't really think of it as an event, like it was kind of just like, yeah, I'm doing my job. And they were like, well, throw another. This is a good event. So then I threw the second one that was independent from the company.
Work gig, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like left that job. I was, you know, I was kind of thinking, well, I don't know what this farmer's dinner thing is, but it was at least fun, so let's do one more. The second one sold out within 24 hours, and we had a 110-person waiting list.
Damn.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, oh, I didn't really expect this, and it was pretty cool. And really credit to Joe Drift and credit to the farmers like Kagan and Carl who came out and showed a lot of support in the beginning. By the time we did the second, I kind of had the concept of like, well, this could be a thing, right? But like, there's no business model, to my knowledge, that existed for this, right? Like, what am I going to do? And it was all in restaurants. I said, wow, this would be really cool on a farm, but like, how do you throw a dinner where there's no running water or electricity?
Right.
You know, it's pretty hard. So I decided that I wanted to throw another event, and I partnered with another restaurant just on the outskirts of Nashua, and sold that one out again, and that was the biggest one we did.
So up this point, you're doing pop-ups, but you're not on the farm yet. You're bringing the farmers to the restaurant, and you're basically just like doing a pop-up with the farmer in a restaurant.
Yeah, I was kind of like a liaison between the farmer and the chef. So I know how to speak chef at the time, right?
Yeah.
Because that was my career. So the chef would be like, why am I going to spend $5.25 a pound for chicken? And I'm like, well, here's why. It's this biodynamic farm. And they were like, the what? You know, so I had
that's
to learn
all marketing too. Like that's all a story.
Sure, but in 2012 in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
you know, you're not really you're breaking the mold, but you don't see the statue for what it is underneath.
Yeah,
you know,
like I feel like Evan Mallett at the time was like the guy, like in New Hampshire. My first guest, by the way, ever on the show, Evan Mallett from New Hampshire.
No kidding.
Black trumpet, great dude, doing great stuff. But he was kind of like the grandpa of like slow food in New Hampshire, and like he and maybe a handful of other people, Matt Lewis, maybe at that time, were doing it right. You know.
Yeah, he's like the OG.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't even know the Seacoast existed in the food scene at the time. Like, it was just complete ignorance.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I could speak chef, and the chefs were pissed off because everything was expensive. So I had to learn how to speak farmer. So that's when I started liaisoning between both and saying, Debbie at Kimball, who kind of runs their farm stand, I was like, hey, can I get like apples? And it would be like April. And she's like, what are you talking about? You know? And I was like, well, when does eggplant grow? So I would start writing this down in a notebook of the seasonality of things. Because as chefs, you understand that like we don't have seasons in a restaurant. Like we have this global supermarket.
Yeah.
So I had to learn the growing cycles. And then, so I spent about 6 months on local farms just trying to understand how we went from seed to plate. And that journey ended up changing my life, where a lot of these chefs in the area were doing what they knew how to do, right? To bring it full circle with the Maya Angelou quote, you did what you knew how to do. And then I realized my knowing better was the experience at the farms. My doing better to complete that quote would be me taking over. We would have astronomical.
What do you mean? Do you mean taking over? Taking over the farm? Like, what do you mean by that? Like
so me taking over the cooking side of it.
Okay, gotcha.
So a lot of the chefs were amazing people, and really, really good at what they do. But understand, like, we're trying to throw a 5 or 6 course pop up, and so they would put out, 2 pounds of like pasta, course 1, and people would leave with all this food, and I was like, yo, my job is I can't teach them because they're not going to come with me to the farm for 10 hours a day. So I was like, I know how to cook. Why don't I do this? And that was the thing that changed the game for me. I decided I'm going to take this and I'm going to get a commissary kitchen. I'm going to start prepping all this food, and I'm going to bring these dinners onto fields and farms. And by 2013 and 2014, my life changed dramatically. I ended up shutting down Main Street with the help of 11 different restaurants in Nashua and doing 300 people. And we hosted the first farmers dinner on Main Street, and that thing sold out. And it was the work of people like Mike Buckley, who just was one of those people who I really learned to look up to. He has no filter, so when he's mad at you, And
so Mike Buckley, make sure he's behind. I know he's got seafood surf in Portsmouth. He's also got Buckley's. He started in Nashua. That's where, and he's branched out. But I'm from the Seacoast. So what's his restaurant group?
Yeah, so Buckley's Great Steaks. He has in Merrimack. He's got MT's Local.
Yeah, he's on my radar. You know I'm coming after you after this interview, right?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, Mike.
He's a great dude. It was funny. So when we did the first Farmers Dinner on Main Street, he was really a linchpin to this. I mean, the man has done so much in his career. His wife is incredible. Like, they're just really great people. And so I remember we were done a meeting, and he pulled me to the side, and he's like, I think this is going to be good. And I was like, thanks, Chef. I appreciate it. And I was like, he's an intimidating person. And so I looked at him. I was like, like off the cuff question. I was like, how did you get started in this? And he kind of like smirked a bit, and he's like, well, MT's was my first restaurant. He's like, I worked so hard, I like slept on the bench most nights there.
That's crazy.
I think about that, and at the end of it ended up coming full circle for me. So we ended up doing the dinner on Main Street. We did this awesome pig roast. Mike and his crew from Buckley's absolutely killed it. It was beautiful. It was well received. At the end of it, we're all scrubbing the street, doing everything. And I look around and I'm like, all right. And so the owner of Villa Blanca at the time was like, hey, come on in for drinks. And so, he poured me a glass of like Johnny Blue, I think at the time. And I'm like, oh man. And I remember sitting there sipping it and going, and I just needed to get away for a minute. So I went and I looked at the street, because I had that visualization of like, I started this thing in the morning, and we all did. And I just wanted to see that moment of what it looked like when everyone was gone. And on his hands and knees is Mike Buckley scrubbing pig grease off the side of the road. And I stop my drink and I run out. And I'm like, Chef, like, do you need help? Like, let me help. And he's like, I got this.
What did that teach you in that moment?
Humility. It taught me that people are only going to respect you for the work that you put in. It's like, so many people have that story of Thomas Keller of like, you walk into his restaurant and he's sitting there mopping the floors. Yeah. And that's Vio. Like, that's Chris Vio. He's that guy. And it certainly takes a village, is what I've learned. But, that lesson with Mike that day was, like, I'll never forget that one.
Yeah, man, that's huge. I'm loving your story right now. What I'm curious about, what I want to ask more, like, knowing what you know now, this dinner that you just shared with us was number 3, 4?
That was, I think, probably 8 at the time,
8?
Somewhere around there.
So you've done like 70, whatever, like 72 more since then. Yeah. Knowing what you know now, after doing so many pop-ups, and now you're using commissaries, you're going to the farm. It's a lot more of a logistical operation for you. You've learned a lot of things the hard way, I'm sure. What advice do you have for somebody who's like, this sounds like exactly what I want to do? Like, what advice do you have, like, logistically and operationally, things that we need to consider to execute what you have been executing since 2012?
Yeah, it's an immense amount of work.
Yeah.
It's, in some ways it's harder than being in a kitchen. Some ways it's easier for sure, because I don't have the grind of every single solitary day. The margins are probably less than in restaurants at times, because you're renting a kitchen, much like you would have, with a lease. But we try to pay everyone really good. I always want to keep paying people a little bit more.
Well, you're not going to give them 40 hours in a week. You're going to give them one event every few weeks.
Right.
So, like, you got to give them reason to keep them around.
And that matters a lot. Like, these people are spending their time choosing to do something that I love so much. And this has become a family. I think that would probably be one of my advice points. Like, understand that people who have worked Farmer's Dinner, we've handpicked them. They've become literally family to us. And I wouldn't be here in any way, shape, or form if it wasn't for those people. Mm-hmm. I am a vessel, and on my best day, maybe a conduit, but that's about it.
So just, you're throwing out some variables that people might not consider. Like, you're gonna have to pay people well, because you're not giving them, like we said, 40, 50 hours a week. So there has to, the pull has to be there. Why, you say they have to be family? Like, why is, like, the quality of the relationship so much more important for what you do versus a restaurant?
Sure. So what we do is we're setting up a restaurant rather than a restaurant set up every day, which is huge. So what we have to do when we set up a Farmer's Dinner is, you're pulling tables in a hot sun. In a restaurant, you have air conditioning. You have all those things. We're literally lugging pots and pans to a commissary kitchen. We're setting up a makeshift kitchen. And then it's going to be like, so we have a dinner this Saturday. It's going to be 90 degrees out. Like, I'm going to be cooking over live fire at 90 degrees. That's fun.
Yeah.
But it's also really hot.
Yeah.
And like, we know we're chefs, like we forget to drink water. We forget to do all that stuff. There's something that when you're in a foxhole together, you end up becoming brothers and sisters. And it's hard work.
I feel you. What about logistically, as far as like tools and services that you use to manage all this? Like, how are you getting the word out? Like, how are people signing up? How are you selling tickets? How are you promoting these events?
Yeah, so obviously social media is huge for us. I started a Facebook page a long time ago, and we're close to 4,000, people, which is big in our area. I use a mailing list. MailChimp has been really great, and then we surpassed, their free quota. So then you start paying for that.
1,000, right? Over 1,000.
Yeah, I think it was over 1,000. We're at like $8,000 or something like that now.
What are you doing to collect these emails?
So in the beginning, that really was a big thing for us. So I had a clipboard and I just asked for people's email addresses. What we do now, since we're much more tech savvy, obviously we have kind of a capture. When you go to the website, there's a thing that, hey, we offer 3 recipes that we love that are farm to table related, just for signing up for our email.
Yeah. And like it's that famous, give then ask, right? Or like you can't just ask for someone's email. You can. I mean, that's what you're doing. I think that the people that show up to you, people that are going to drive to your event at a farm, I mean, clearly they're a demographic of person. They're going to want to know when the next one is. Yeah. So if they're like driving to an event to support something, then ask for an email, because they're telling you they want to be there. This is for them. Yeah. So, but the other thing, like you're saying, like, what's a easy pop-up, right? Like, what's something that I can create? What we did at Restaurant Unstoppables, we put together a list of all the books ever recommended. Oh, cool. Right? Like, we put together a list of all the tools ever recommended. So you just give us your email, and we cut like 150 hours out of your life to not have to research all this stuff. Like, here's awesome. What's been recommended. Yeah. So like adding value in a short little burst in exchange for an email is a great way to build your list. What else?
Yeah, so I love talking about value. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this a lot. Yeah. Jab, jab, punch, or jab, jab, hook. Sorry. He talks about it all the time. Like, I said in the beginning of this, I think my greatest asset and also my greatest folly is that I just give a shit about people. Yeah. And what I try to do is I try to say, hey, listen, just talk to me. In the beginning, there was this lady who emailed me, and she's like, hey, your events look amazing. And I don't think I've told this story. And she's like, I would die to go. I have a couple of kids. And she's like, I'm going to save up and go. And I was like, I don't want you to. Be my guest. And like, I wanted to do that. And like, that isn't about me putting out an email saying, look how great I am. Like, for me, I want the attention back on the farmers, right? Because if the farmer's dinner doesn't exist without the word farmer in its name, then we're just dinner. That's not cool. Mm-hmm. So with us, I want to be that person who, like I said, is a firefly in the midst of darkness. Like, I can't be a lantern. I can't be a lighthouse. Now, that's too much pressure. Like, but if I can just light up a little bit and we can all do that, it changes the game.
I love it, man. That's great stuff. So back to the logistics of this. You're collecting emails. What about like actually selling a ticket? How do you sell a ticket online?
Yeah, so we our system is pretty easy. You just go to thefarmersdinner.com, and then so we use WooCommerce plugin. Our CMS is WordPress. We were able to hook it up through Stripe. Real simple, straightforward, and so somebody can go in, purchase a ticket, has all our disclaimers on there. Hey, you're going to a farm, so please don't wear your stilettos.
So what about those disclaimers? Is this something that you just build up over time as like simple reminders, or like is that a legality thing too?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So with us, our dinners are difficult, right? So if you walk in and you go, hey, I purchased a ticket, P.S. I'm gluten-free, vegan, and I don't really like olive oil. Yeah, I'm screwed. So one of the disclaimers is when you purchase a ticket, if you have any dietary restrictions, please place it in the little comment section, and that goes to us. You learn that by screwing that up in the beginning. Yeah. It's all of your failures lead to successes. Our dinners are predicated on the weather. Like, shitty days mean, we're having shitty days too. Yeah. And so that's like an important part of it. Other things that I think are important that we learn throughout the course of it is, I don't want to tell you what you're eating very far out. So we have done 380 different courses, and we've never repeated one. Once something happens at a farmer's dinner, it's buried forever. I want to do that because I wanted to show the diversity of local products. that, you know, you can make a summer vegetable pizza, but how many times, like, I want somebody to go, I can only have this once and I'm never going to have it again. That's pretty cool.
That is cool. So with the website, you have the WordPress website. You're using what plugin again?
We're using, see, now you just asked me.
I know. I just want to make sure that
WooCommerce.
WooCommerce.
Yeah.
It's a simple plugin that allows you to connect to Stripe, which is the how you're charging people. They're paying through Stripe.
Yep.
They take their cut. And then you're also able with Woo to put in disclaimers. What else can you get from that service? That's
Woo's cool because we sell merch through there. We have shirts and hats and like books and stuff like that. So we can.
I don't know if you guys have, if you're watching the video, I don't know if you've seen these strategically placed lovely books right here on the table.
So I mean, we can do that. We also use an add-on called Event Ticket Pro.
Okay.
And that gives us like a whole calendar of events. That's how we generate our.
So it's another plugin, or does it pull people off of your website and put them onto?
No, it's all integrated seamlessly.
Nice.
We don't want anyone to have to leave the site. Like if it's more than 3 clicks, we kind of screwed up. You know.
Yeah.
We have no attention span nowadays.
Yeah,
so.
I feel that.
So that's like the core of it. I mean, it's really simple and straightforward. Yeah.
Beautiful. Good to know. So anything else that would, like, if somebody's listening to this and they're in California and they're like, this is a cool angle or like whatever, and they want to try to replicate what you've done, any other like little tips of the trade after doing 80 of these?
Yeah. Have a really good commissary kitchen. The investment is more than we thought in the beginning because like you're having to buy pots, pans, and like large quantity stuff because depending on what you want to do. For us, 50 people was manageable as we started to grow more and do events for 125, 175, and then 325. It requires a lot more of an army. Washing 5 courses of dishes for 300 people is really crappy.
Would it be cheaper to rent the dishes?
So we did for a while, but then you look at cost projections over time, and it ends up being cheaper to own it. So it's that constant back and forth. Like if you really, really, really want a restaurant or you really want to do this industry, learn how to do great spreadsheets and crunch numbers.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I need to find somebody who's good at that if I'm ever going to open a restaurant.
Right.
So the other thing I'm curious about, so you're charging $89 a head for these. What % profit do you get on that?
Yeah. So, it depends on how big the dinner is. So if we end up doing larger dinners and we can buy things at bulk for farms and stuff, it ends up we get a little bit better of a cut. So at times you're sitting there at 10 to 15. At times we've done dinners that have made a little bit more than that, which was cool too. But about 10% is your return on investment for some of this stuff.
The percentages aren't too far off from the restaurant industry.
They're not. And sometimes they're worse too. I mean, understand that our margins go to shit if it rains and we need to tent this whole thing.
Okay.
Tent rentals are insanely expensive.
So if you're doing a dinner for 300 people and you're taking 10%, you're taking right around just shy of $3,000 that you're putting in your pocket.
Yeah, depending on a lot of different factors. We did one dinner that was more than double that for sure. It depends on. So we'll bring in guest chefs, and if the guest chef's like, "Hey, I want to do foie gras," that's going to change the game.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess the reason why I'm so interested in these pop-ups right now, the appeal is because within the restaurant industry, there's a lot of regulation and restriction around what we can do in our restaurants, right? Mm-hmm. But these events are on private property. They're at the farm, and there's no limitation on what you can do on those farms, really. So I feel like depending on what the future looks like, this is going to be a huge opportunity to. What's going on, man? Don't be shy. I told Keith before this. He's like, I might have my roommate walk through. I'm like, dude, I do these interviews in restaurants on site.
Right.
Like, worse things have happened during the middle of a recording. We'll be fine. So I think there's just if we're going to be like, who knows how long these restrictions are going to be around. Mm-hmm. I feel like you're going to see a lot more private events, a lot more catering. And I think that this is something that we can do, even if it's just for the short term, to get ourselves away from all the restrictions. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, even though we're on private property, we do it by the book. Yeah, we have a huge responsibility, man. Like, the last thing I want to do is be a super spreader event. Like, come on, man. Like, the amount of guilt I would feel is insane. So right now we're limiting all of our events to 50 people. That was the mandate that Charlie Baker and Mass wanted. And so we're cool with that. You know, it's much better financially for our company if we could do our dinners of 125 plus. Yeah. There's no question at all. Times have hit us really, really hard. But the good news is I can go to sleep at night going, hey, instead of having one long table like we typically have, we group everything into, if you buy a 6-top, you're getting your own table. If you buy a 4-top, you actually get your own table too. 2 tops are spread 6 feet, apart. We're in masks the entire time. You're 6 foot distance from any other person. That breaks the aesthetic of our dinner tremendously. Yeah. It sucks. I bet. But what we try to do is up the love even more. We try to be really responsible with the food that we're putting out. We have a list of names, obviously, so we can contact trace anything that needs to be. Like, we're in an unprecedented time, and God, do I hate that, right? I'm so tired of that. But the reality is, like, we all have a responsibility in our own kitchens, even before this, not to get anyone sick. Yeah. How much more do we have now to just make somebody feel comfortable? Yeah.
I feel like everybody has a responsibility to everybody to make sure we're safe. But at the same time, I don't know if it's fair to put the sole burden on the small business owner to make it. Because at what point, if you're going to an event, unless you're living under a rock, you know that it's inherently more risky to be out right now. So when do we pass some of the responsibility onto the consumer? That's the thing that I know maybe that's another topic for another day. But I just think that this is a really interesting angle. The one thing we haven't covered, and I'm curious if it's different for pop-ups or this business model you have, is permitting. Like, you obviously need to become an LLC, or not an LLC, but a business entity. You need an EIN number. What do you need? Different permitting or licenses to be able to do what you're doing?
Yeah, so we need really good insurance. Okay, so we have to have anytime that we go to a facility, we indemnify them as well to make sure that they're on our insurance as well. So there's a lot of, like, every event you're kind of updating your insurance. That matters a lot. Obviously, when it comes to working in commissary kitchens, we need to make sure it's a fully licensed commissary kitchen.
Yeah. Back to the insurance. Are there any elements of the insurance, key words that are specific or unique to what you're doing that need to be on that insurance?
Yeah. So the first thing that we learned the hard way is being able to make changes to the insurance when it comes to who is listed. Okay. Like I kind of just mentioned there, that was important. So we take out a $2 million aggregate. Wow. And that's that. Thankfully, we haven't had any occurrences that need to be, but you're on a farm. Like, I cannot stress this enough. Like, there's sight smells. Yeah. Like, and so we're like, please understand that, like, driving up in your lowered Corvette is not going to be a good idea on a farm, So it's, so we have to, like, prep people, because it's amazing how many people still don't go to farms, right? Where they don't realize, like, oh man, that's going to smell weird at times, or there's going to be some mud there. Our job is to try to make it the nicest situation possible, given everything that goes on.
I love it. Farmers well enough. I have this question. Maybe it's not really relative. We might edit this out. Who knows? I had this idea back when I was really serious about buying an RV, travel the country for the podcast. Still on my radar. That how cool would it be just to, like, ask a farm if I could park on their farm. In return, I would promote their farm to that community of restaurants. Would a farmer be interested in that?
So here's why they will. Farmers are not marketers. I cannot stress this enough. Like, they, like, might have, like, a ragtag Facebook with, like, a couple of, like, iPhone 4 images. Yeah. But, like, the reality is, like, they don't know how to put together any sort of marketing, and I don't blame them for it.
Yeah, they're on field. They're in the field all day. Yeah,
right. Which is why our job at Farmers Dinner is to be like, look at how cool these farmers are. Yeah, go there now.
I'm gonna revisit that idea.
You need to, man. You're just a walking, like, business, like, encyclopedia up there.
Right. Okay. I'm loving this conversation, man. We've covered a lot. There was one element. You recently opened a restaurant in 2019, the end of 2019, less than a year ago. About a year ago is when you were opening your restaurant. What happened? Because you're no longer a part of that restaurant. Well, first tell us about that experience opening your very first restaurant. Like, what mix of, like, just take us through that whole experience.
It's insane. It was a really hard time in my life. So Chris really wanted to open a restaurant, and
Chris you mentioned a few times.
yeah, Chris Vio was my partner for that, and came on for Farmer's Dinner, and then we opened our first restaurant together last year. And you know, I was going through so much stuff. My mom was terminally sick. She had cancer, and then she passed away.
I'm sorry.
I was finishing the Farmer's Dinner cookbook with Chris, who co-wrote it. I had like a lot of personal life stuff going on. And to say that point was difficult would be probably the biggest understatement I could ever make. When you have that type of grief, it fundamentally changes you. Chris, originally Chris and I kind of wanted to open a 30 to 50 seat restaurant. We ended up opening a 100-seat restaurant. We found this cool place in Milford, New Hampshire, and went from there. And then, you know, dealing with the opening side of things and just how much stress it is. Anyone who's ever opened a restaurant, you know, you're like, oh, I need 100,000 for this. You need like 500. You know, it's whatever you think you know, you don't know.
Yeah.
Great experience, great partner, and subsequently wrong timing for some of my part in life.
Yeah.
You know, where I was dealing with all of that. I ended up working on front of the house. I didn't have a ton of front of the house experience, but I'm really good at picking things up quick. Hired a general manager who's just the man. He was an old friend of mine. Did an amazing job, still does an amazing job. And then it was kind of Chris's concept in the back with the food. And it was amazing. We won Best New Restaurant in the state year one.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We hired an amazing staff of people who basically are all still there. You know, went through some growing pains for sure with some of the staff, but that's to be expected.
Yeah.
And then I got to the point where, you know, COVID hit, and it was, you know, we kind of have to go, well, there's no playbook for this. And, you know, I wanted to do one thing. The rest of the group wanted to do another. That's painful. That's difficult. But the good thing that I saw through it is Chris does a really good job of thinking about things with a lot of compassion. You know, he's always kind of been the person who's like, I want to do this fair. I think, you know, that's one of the testaments to who he is as a person. And his family's amazing too. They're just the coolest people ever. This was an opportunity, you know, it was a lot of strife within the group, right? You know, where you're dealing with a conflict of ideologies of how we move forward. But at the end of the day, I finally said, I need to leave. Like, I need to take a step back. And my heart wasn't in this. Like, I'm a chef. You know, I miss cooking. I miss being at farms. I miss, like, doing stuff like this. I miss writing books. Like, this was the stuff that's so much a fabric of who I am, and I felt like I didn't get to tap into that as much as I wanted. You know, and that was hard. I left something that I loved so much with people that I loved, and I learned a really important lesson, and I think that lesson was you can disagree with people, but it doesn't make them bad people. You know, I think that, you know, obviously things weren't perfect. You know, I don't know what perfect would have looked like, but looking back on it, I want to be able to close this chapter in my life and say, you know, I learned a lot of lessons. I had an amazing ride with this, and I continued to be able to be a friend to somebody.
Yeah. What are the biggest lessons you learned?
Partnerships are hard.
Yep.
But I think, you know, if Chris was sitting here, he would probably echo the same thing. Like, we're both really lucky we found each other. And I still say that. You know, a lot of partnerships, when they end, they don't get to say that. They're like, F that guy, you know. But there's nothing bad to say about Chris. We had a difference in the way that we wanted to run some things, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, conflict is inevitable, and that's like part of it, you know. He just won like most inventive or creative chef in the state, like best of best, and like he freaking deserves that.
Yeah.
The dude's a rock star, and I hope everyone goes there. And yeah, it's hard to say that sometimes, right? Because like I left a part of me there.
Yeah. No, listening to you talk, I mean, I can't help but think like the importance of a vision, right? And I'm not saying you guys didn't have vision, because you definitely have vision, but like something this is striking near and dear to my heart too, because I was just working on Restaurant Unstoppable, and Casey and I are very open about this. Like we were working together to grow this thing. We decided that it felt like our visions weren't the same for the roles within Restaurant Unstoppable. Yep. And like, it's so important to get this stuff out, to talk about, like, not just where we're going, like what's like the business going to look like what are the things we're going to be doing, but what do our roles within the business look like? Yep. And who's going to be responsible for what, and like, what's that going to look like? And it sounds like it's so overkill, but the thing is, when you get these things out, when you start sharing what your thoughts for what your roles are going to look like, then you get much more intentional, and you know that when 2 years down the line, when you're not doing what you said you were going to do, like, if you can get ahead of that by just having conversations. So knowing what you know now, everything you know now, what would you have done differently maybe there wasn't anything else you could have done differently. That's an answer too. But like, knowing what you know now, would you have set the partnership up differently? Would you have communicated differently in the beginning?
Yeah, I think I probably would have, it's hard. So I sit here and I go, I have so much love for him, his family, and all of the people who work there. Yeah. And that's like no bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, so if I did anything to alter that and I wouldn't have love for them, then I wouldn't do anything differently. But I think like I was a first time owner, right? Yeah. And so is Chris, obviously. So the stress of that, I think we made mountains out of molehills sometimes. I know that I did. Mm-hmm. I certainly think I would have slowed the process down and not grown as fast. I think that was a mistake. I think I really would have spent more time kind of understanding a deeper level of this business. Mm-hmm. That I did my best. It's the Maya Angelou quote again, right? Yeah. It's coming back to haunt us. Yeah. I really did, what I knew how to do at that time. And I'm thankful that through this process, which understand has been hard. Like,
it's not easy to talk about this stuff, but
no.
Like, this is the reason why, because you could go to like any resource and get any template of a checklist or a spreadsheet and plug those things into your business. Yeah. But at the end of the day, like, it's hard to learn about partnerships and how to communicate and how to set things up and how to manage relationships, specifically the people that own equity in your business, that sort of thing. And that's why we need to talk about this stuff, because this is the stuff that will blindside you if you have no experience or you have no idea what to anticipate or the things that could even happen.
Right. So I think one of the things that both Chris and I did, and there was moments, where I think we swayed from this, but like, we understood that like the person that I'm sitting there looking at is a good human being.
Yeah.
Like, he freaking is, and so it's easy to get wrapped up in the emotions of the moment, but I never thought that like, oh man, who did I become a partner with? Like, what a jerk. Like, not at all. Yeah. Like, and so it's hard to talk about that stuff, but it's hard in the ways of like, hey, I just got out of this really great relationship and like, we broke up because we just weren't right for each other. Mm-hmm. That person's still awesome. Yeah. Being able to have the ability to separate the actions from the human being is a lesson that I think I learned there. And I hope that, when he sees this, I hope that he says, yeah, I nailed it. That's it too. I want every single person who hears this to go support him and his family, because that dude works harder than anyone ever, and he's amazing.
So we've talked a lot about the restaurant industry, but you're also an entrepreneur. You have your books. Do you have any advice around creating multiple channels of revenue, not just being a restaurateur, but also throwing in that like entrepreneurial mix too?
Yeah, I try to diversify a lot of the stuff that I do. The cookbooks were a really amazing opportunity to just kind of tell a story, which is really what I try to do, right? We're just storytellers. Yeah. And I think other than that, I think of entrepreneurship a lot like the difference between passion and desire. Like, passion is that thing is, you get in a new relationship and you got that honeymoon period and they can do no wrong and they're wonderful. And then all of a sudden you start saying, oh, well, like, it's annoying when, she leaves the light on or all that stuff. Desire. So passion is that thing that fuels you in the beginning. Desire is the ability to get up each day and to continue to put your all in it, even when you don't have that feeling. And believe me, I've been through a lot of stuff in the last 2 years. There's a lot of times in my life where in the last 2 years, I just wanted to call it quits. Yeah. I don't want to get out of bed. And there's still days like that.
I have days like that with Restaurant Unstoppable.
Right.
I think this past year has been a real test. Like,
yeah.
I mean, Jared will tell you how long we've been working to build up Restaurant Unstoppable to the point where I could travel across the nation and be able to support those that come with me. Then
awesome.
COVID-19 hits, and it's like backpedal a few years, but I think a lot of people can relate to that right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to say, right? Like, I appreciate your story so much because, like, we always see that beautiful picture of social media of, like, hey, look, he's doing it again.
Yeah.
Like, Eric's so cool, like all this stuff.
Stop.
Yeah, keep it going. And it's easy for me. I wrote 2 books, I did all this stuff, but like, understand that like I'm still going through the sadness of losing a restaurant, and that's not easy. But you still have a lot of love, and the sadness of my mom, and all that stuff doesn't go away. It just becomes a little bit different. Instead of the 20-foot wave, it becomes a 10-foot wave, and then a swell, and all that other stuff. Yeah, right?
Yeah. Man, I love this. I really enjoyed our conversation. The only other thing that's popping into my head right now, I know that you've generated a lot of revenue for these farms. That those numbers that we shared, I think it was 140,000.
Yeah.
Is that just the money that you're using to purchase the food from the farm that goes back? Is that the number that you're looking at?
Yeah, so that's a lot of it right there. Yeah. We've also been able to be really blessed to partner with a couple of agencies that help. So there's a thing called easement, like when you can put your land into easement. With farms, they're often on a 99-year lease, which is such a weird thing that they do. A lot of the farms want to own their land so that they can make the infrastructure changes to grow. And there's a gentleman named Ian McSweeney who works with the Agrarian Trust Foundation, and we've been able to partner with him on several different farm dinners to help raise funds toward that. And even now, we're working with the Agrarian Trust to help the Somali Bantu community in Maine purchase their farm. And they have an incredible story. You can find out that on our website, thefarmersdinner.com.
Yeah. And one other thing that I want to make sure we bring to the surface before we go to the speed round is this idea of like, for all those restaurateurs who are listening to this that would say, "Oh, I wish I could support local farms, but that's just outside of that's just not possible." What's your message for those people that could be making more of an effort to source locally and to support their local economies?
Yeah, stop being lazy. No, like seriously, it is. We're living in this age where it's not hard to support local farms anymore, and it starts by going to build a connection with those farms. You've got at least one day off, I promise. And if you don't make at least 2 hours to take a trip to a farm, introduce yourself and figure out how to make this happen.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot, and there's a lot of let's be honest, a lot of people, depending on where you are in the nation right now, your demographic might not be willing to support you supporting your farmer. Yeah. And that's a real scenario that plays out. What's your message to those people who say, like, if I put an $8 burger on my menu, or a $10 burger on my menu, or a $12 burger on my menu, depending on where you are and how big the burger is, like, my customers just won't buy that. Like, that won't fly here. Like, what's your message to them?
You're a chef and your job is to educate, right? Like, our job, when we put out a dish, that's part of our message that we're putting out to that customer, and they're ingesting that. Mm-hmm. And so I cannot say enough that the reception for people who want to support local farms through the medium of restaurants, farmers dinner, pop-up events, you're going to see it everywhere now.
Yeah.
It's not a fad anymore.
Yeah. Give me the elevator pitch for the restaurateur who's justifying the cost of that burger.
Yeah. So it starts by understanding that there's certain marketing terms that you should be using. Grass-fed is one of them. Organic is a little bastardized, but it's still a buzzword that makes sense. One of the things that we do, and I encourage everyone to do this, is if you put a local burger on the menu and that price tag is $16 or $18, explain why.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can do that is saying, hey, this beef comes from 4 miles away or 14 miles away. Yep. When the average meal travels 1,500 miles until it reaches your plate.
Yeah. I think it just comes, there's so much information out there now. If anybody watches Netflix, they know that there's a documentary around every corner about how our decisions with especially food decisions, the impact that has on Earth. And I think that we've kind of hit a ceiling with how good we can get food. I think that we've gotten to the point where we realize, it's not just about how I cook it, it's about how I grow it, and it's not about just how we grow it, it's about growing it as close to the natural way as possible. And when we do this, the earth is better. The earth likes it more too. And then once we start realizing, well, if we can make the earth healthier, then we can make even more healthy food. Like, you know, I think like eventually, like when you look at like the trend of people trying to be as healthy as possible, they're going to realize that the way that I become as healthy as possible is when I eat food that's been raised as humanely as possible. And people are selfish. You've got to make it about them.
Yeah.
So if you can connect those dots and let people know that, hey, if you eat this food, it's going to be the best thing for you.
Right.
And everything that touches that, you know, for everyone. I think that's the next message.
We vote with our dollar,
yeah,
right? Like,
for sure.
And if I'm spending more on a burger, but I know that money goes back to local farms, that's a win.
Yeah.
That's a huge win.
I agree with everything that's been dropped today, man. This has been a great conversation. I'm trying to wrap up every free-flowing portion of the conversation with this question. So the mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. How have you transformed as a human and just as a professional?
Yeah, great question. I think I've transformed by embracing my failures, and believe me, there's a lot of them, right? I think we talked about, you know, not having a clear definition of success all the time. My definition of success now means to be a little bit better every day. I want to be a great business owner. I want to be a great person. And I want to be able to leave this planet just a little bit better than I found it.
All right, we're back. And the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
A book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
And that book is your it factor. Get into that. Why?
So 4 simple agreements that you make with yourself. 1 is to not take things personally. 2 is to not make assumptions. Another one is to be impeccable with your word. And finally, always do your best. And they're kind of like guide marks for you to always check where you're at.
Yeah, I love those. I think my exercise this week and next week is going to be working on my core values.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to work those ones in there.
You got this, man.
A little pitch, a little actually, when will this be live? Oh, never mind. This won't be live until after our workshop with Rudy Mick on core values. Never mind. Sorry. What is your biggest weakness today?
Me. Yeah. Honestly, you know, I want to be healthy in mind and body. And, you know, I think, you know, I'm starting to finally get my mind back. It's time that I, you know, focus on those other aspects as well.
Yeah. What is one question you ask or thing you look for during the interview process? So when you're looking to grow your team, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for somebody who is ready to kind of take their career to the next level, but also understands that, you know, we're in this because we're creatives, and I don't want somebody to paint the picture. I want them to add a color.
I like that. That's cool. What is your biggest challenge today?
Biggest challenge today is to not let my past grief control who I am during the course of a day. Does that make sense?
Don't let your past grief control who you are in a day.
Yeah, you know, so the nation and everyone in the world kind of grieving. We went through COVID. We've lost a lot.
Yeah.
I've personally, like I said, you know, talked about my mom and Steve and all these other people. It's easy to become your pain and your trauma. And I'm working on, even just saying that is hard, right? Because, like, people are going to watch this. They're going to be like, oh, what a bitch.
What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your team? So this is something that we do that go above and beyond what's expected from us.
I love that. I think that one of the things that we always try to do is to instill a message of, we want somebody to feel like they're walking into their own, into our home, right? Where they're like, whoa, this is an amazing. Chris actually used to say this when we first started opening up. He's like, I want. We had a picture of my mom. That's that picture over there. That was on the bar. There's little Easter eggs around the restaurant that Chef put in and I got to put in that mean a lot to us.
I love that. What is one book that's a must read to make us a better person or restaurant owner?
Well, I dropped the 4 agreements, so I'm going to give you a bonus one
Nice.
on top because the 4 agreements is gold. I would say, oh man, there's so many I could pop off the top of my head. For me, it's a lot about finding out a lot of internal stuff. So I would say Melody Beattie wrote a really good book about attachment, and so I would say that. You know, and it's a weird answer, but to be a good person in the hospitality world, you have to understand that you have to love people.
I love it. What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
I think they forget what it's like to be the server. We forget, they'll do the work, but I think we often overlook that people have bad days. It's hard. This world isn't always easy. It's not always sunshine and rainbow. So I think making sure that we understand that we're not better, we're just different.
Yeah. So these next two questions are really just trying to help good people connect with good people, the services and tools you're using. So name one service you've hired. So a company that you've gone to for service that's been incredible, whether it was consulting or specific work they did for you. What is that company and how can we find them?
A lot of cool ones, actually. It's a great question.
Drop them on us.
So Toast.
Yes.
So we use Toast for a POS system, and we did a lot of research in POS. I got to admit, their customer service was just unparalleled. We've used them. So Chris ended up opening a sandwich shop down the road, and he uses Toast for that as well. Love Toast. Great people.
Yeah. Toast is my only sponsor right now.
What?
We're doing a CPA sponsorship with them, meaning if you use our link, if you go to toasttab.com/unstoppable right now, you use that link. You cannot have made prior contact with Toast. They will send us a check for $2,500, and we will split our commission with you if you use that link.
That's
so
cool.
I don't know of a better. So I think Toast is offering up to $1,000 worth of incentives. We're going to match that. So I don't know of a better deal out there.
So for the record, I did not know that.
Yeah, this wasn't props. Yeah.
Not
It's
at all.
by far the most recommended POS on the show. You said you had a couple. Was there any other ones you wanted to mention?
Yeah. So some of the vendors that we ended up working with, I think we're really good.
The next question I was going to ask you is what's one technology? So we'll just went out of order. So now you can drop the vendors on
Okay, cool. So Dolan Bailey's done a really good job. Like, we didn't, so with our restaurant, we use a lot of farms, but we have to augment it with some other things too, So I think that they've been really good. Black River Produce was another one that we got to tour a lot of their facilities. I was really happy with them. And then Sid Wainer as well. Sid Wainer, their products are always really good. And I know some of the reps that work there, and I've got to be really good friends with them. And their stuff was great too. So
nice. All right, we'll be sure to link to those in the show notes. And this is the last question. It's a doozy, so get ready for it. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
Damn, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
One. To tie into that question, legacy is greater than currency.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of my life poor, so I thought chasing money was going to make it better. It doesn't. 2, life is about letting go. It's about letting go of the expectations that we have for ourselves, but also on others. And 3, I think 3 would be we don't define people with our judgments. Our judgments define us.
I love it, man. This has been a great chat. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. That's how I find my future guests in the show. So who is one restaurateur, somebody you respect and admire, and if I had them on the show tomorrow, you'd be tuning in for sure?
Yeah. Oh, he's going to kill me. I think you should talk to Chris.
I'd love to talk to Chris.
Chris is really one of the chefs I still look up to. Great businessman, hard-ass worker, and I think you guys would have a blast.
Chris, look out, I'm coming after you. And I'm going to get Chris Himmel back on the show, too.
Himmel!
Yeah, because I think that one of the I'm kind of going through my own little journey, too, this past 6 months, 8 months have been crazy. One of the things I realized, exactly to the compound of what you said, it's about the journey, and I'm going so fast trying to find the next person. I've forgotten that there's 700 amazing people I've already connected with that I would love to reconnect with and go deeper. And it's not about how many people it's about the quality of those relationships, which is why I need to get Chris Himmel back on the show, because he was a great guest, and there's just so much more I know I can pull out of these individuals that we've already had on the show. So thank you so much, Keith. We have to ask, what's the best way for us to connect with you? Where can we find your books? How can we contact you if we want to reach out to you? What's the best way to connect?
Sure. KeithSarasin.com. You can find my books, all that fun stuff. Instagram, Keith Sarasin, and then Facebook, Chef Keith Sarasin. Real easy.
I'm pretty sure this is going to be episode 742.
Damn. Congratulations.
So, thank you, man. Thank you very much. Head over to restaurantunstoppable.com/742. We'll have a summary of today's discussion, as well as all those tools and services and books recommended and how to connect with Keith over there. I can't say it enough. Thank you so much. And there is no questioning. You are unstoppable.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Cheers.